Hi there, my name is Spencer Chimuk and I'm a partner at McLeod Law. I'm here today with one of my favorite clients, Albert Lee, President and CEO of Closure Liability Management Inc. Albert's been doing some really cool and interesting work in reclamation and regulatory work for wells across Alberta. And we're here to talk today about what's going on in the industry and hear about some exciting things that Albert has going on with his business. So thanks for coming, Albert.
Thanks very much for having me, Spencer. This is, love to help spread the word out on all these things that are going on in the province and in Western Canada in general.
Yeah, you know what? It's an interesting industry and there's a lot of change and stuff that's happening. So it's always nice to hear directly from people who are, on the cutting edge of new developments in the space. So let's start with the basics, Albert. What is Closure Liability Management? Tell me a bit about the business.
Closure is a pure focus liability management company looking at focusing purely on oil and gas inactive sites. So you talk about wells on the subsurface, you talk about sites on the surface, any kind of equipment, that sort of thing. And as these entities go inactive or dormant, they need to be retired. So what we're focusing on is trying to make that the most efficient way possible to close these sites more efficiently, more cost effectively, more predictably. So, you look at the inventory of inactive sites in Alberta, we'll talk about specifically.
Yeah.
It's been growing year over year, and it's something that's coming into more public view, a little bit more public pressure around it, and a lot more focus on how is the oil and gas industry addressing these growing inventory of inactive sites.
Yeah, it's I know it's a huge problem in the province, a number of abandoned wells. So, in essence, Closure is helping companies when they get to the end of that life cycle of the producing asset to reclaim it, clean it up, and responsibly wind it down. Is that fair?
Correct, yeah.
So, what's been happening in 2024 in your industry and in your space?
There is actually a proactive move amongst the UCP government now, actually, to try to look at liability management a little bit differently, a little bit more proactively. How do we have a more of a real impact on reducing this inventory? There's been a lot of discussions around it, and we've been lucky to be, invited to have some of these discussions with the government as well. In 2024, you're looking at, the first couple of years that the Alberta government and the Alberta Energy Regulator, AER, has mandated companies spend a minimum amount of money in this space. And it's evolving, and how companies behave and how they are spending their money. And so we were seeing some interesting things this year.
Yeah, for sure. So obviously there's a huge inventory of abandoned wells. This is an industry problem that I think is fairly well known. What was the motivation for you to start a business in this space and start tackling on this problem?
I think you have to be a little bit unhinged to take a real interest in this part of the business.
Yeah.
Because it's a non-revenue generating part of the business. But in growing up in my career, working primarily at upstream oil and gas companies, it was always part of my job in operations and production, engineering, completions, that sort of thing. But nothing that really people paid a lot of attention to, which when you don't pay a lot of attention to it, means you don't do things very efficiently, you don't do things very cost effectively. And now that, everybody's focusing it a little bit more, it became very apparent that you needed to do a better job at it. So that is really what we're focusing on.
And it's always challenging starting a new business. I can't imagine what it's like starting a new business in an area that can be as technical as this type of work can be. And also Closure's working on developing some new software and other products. So what are some of the challenges, or what advice would you give someone who's, thinking about starting to enter this space or come into business like that?
Startup companies are always a dream for a lot of people. And you're jumping into the deep end, right? And coming from my background, I have run other small businesses in the past, and it's taught me a lot of these lessons about make sure you have good structure within your companies when you start, right? When you're talking about shareholders, legal agreements and that sort of thing. You have a good base, so when you launch your company, all those things are taken care of before you start having maybe issues or problems with your company, right?
Yeah, I think that's good advice. I mean, you need to have the right structure in the foundation if you're going to build a house, or you can quickly get into problems. And I always find it's helpful to build that structure early, even if it's simplistic, than trying to pick up the pieces later on. But let's talk a bit about Closure. You guys are working on a new digital platform and some exciting new software. It's called Predico. What is Predico? Tell me what it's about.
The root of the word is Latin. It means to foretell or to predict, right? So when you talk about this type of work in the liability management space, there's a lot of manual processes, right? Gathering data, trying to piece together a puzzle, and trying to piece together how do I most efficiently attack this problem, right? If I'm at a company and I have 1,000 entities, how do I determine what's the best strategy to most cost effectively and cost predictably retire those liabilities, right? So what Predico will do is it'll auto aggregate all this data and run analysis on it. So then you can categorize the risk and complexity very quickly. Historically, these are the things you do manually. You're looking at entities well by well or site by site. It just takes a long time. So to be able to have a very quick analysis on a large inventory helps you plan a 1 year, a 3 year, or a 5 year plan to build a more predictable program.
And can you tell me, Albert, why Closure decided that they wanted to make the investment and the focus on developing this platform, and some of the ways you're using technology to enhance efficiencies in the process?
Well, one of the things around the industry and the mergers and acquisitions market is a very, very important part of this industry, right? Because and monetization events, sure, but however, also bringing capital into the province with new investment. One of our founders, he was an investment banker, and that's originally how some of the business concept formulated. He worked as an investment banker, and he was telling me anecdotally, 95% of their transactions get held up because of uncertainty around liabilities. So it's such a black box that nobody knows what's in it.
Yeah.
So it actually killed a bunch of the deals. So he said, how do we evaluate things more quickly and be able to characterize how big or how small this liability is to move these transactions forward?
So what does Predico do as a tool? Is it an analysis tool for transactions if someone's going to buy a new asset to understand the hair on the dog, so to speak? Or is it different, something to be used internally by companies as they're managing their own inventory?
Well, the objective is to be able to build a site-specific, bottoms-up assessment of the complexity and the risk of a site. So how much is this going to cost me to retire? So you identify the actual risk to the environment, or risk to municipalities, or risk to operations around you, and that translates into a cost. So if you can characterize complexity and risk and translate it into a cost, you start putting some goalposts around how bad or how good a liability could be, right? So when you roll it all up, you start getting numbers. Then you work on the mergers and acquisition side. Or if you're building multi-year programs on retirement of liabilities, then you can know which sites that you want to attack and a strategy around. I want to do, 90% easy ones, and then I got to tackle 10% hard ones in this program.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting, and it sounds like a great tool that has a lot of purposes to it. One of the interesting things about your space, and we've talked about this before, is there's a bevy of regulations that apply, and the regulations aren't static. They're changing, they're evolving. Companies are getting new directions, new minimum spends, and things like that. So how does Predico keep up with a bit of a moving target on the regulatory side?
We obviously, regulations come out, there's a million of them, but you really have to keep an eye on them. We have to make sure we're very current in making sure Predico accounts for all the new regulation changes, right? All I can say is we have to be very aware of different regulations in different jurisdictions, because our goal is to be able to cover initially Alberta, then Western Canada, and potentially other energy producing jurisdictions around the world. So, I mean, there's really no automatic answer on keeping up with regulations.
Yeah.
You just need to be aware of everything going on, and consistent communication with the various regulators. It's a major help in keeping up with everything.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, the regulations that apply, these compel, or they're supposed to compel companies to responsibly and sustainably manage and wind down their assets as they reach the end of that life cycle. But this is oil and gas. We know that cash can be king, so to speak. So how does the work you're doing, or how does Predico help or affect the bottom line for people who are dealing with these liabilities?
Really, one of our catchphrases is "We help you become more predictable," right? And it's not a revenue generator, so you're trying to cut costs as much as you can, but being compliant. To be able to characterize, to understand your liabilities. Right now, I think the liability numbers on people's books, there's uncertainty around it, and there's been articles written around it recently regarding the AER recognizing that there's uncertainty around their numbers as well. We are trying to put just better evidence and support around characterizing the costs and the risk.
Yeah, and like again, that software obviously is more efficient than you or I combing through all of those reams of data. One of the challenges I always find when a new system rolls out is, how do I use it? So is this a system that is designed for Closure to use internally? Is it user-friendly to your end clients? How does the training and the support work?
It's definitely something that we hope to put in users' hands, because and we'll have to walk people through it, right? Like right now, the asset retirement process is very siloed, we find, right? So when you start a site into the asset retirement process, you go from subsurface plug-in abandonment, and then it gets kicked over to your environmental side to a site assessment, and if it fails that site assessment, it goes into a more detailed site assessment, and everything along the way is kind of siloed. We're trying to build a cohesive process where the data from one stage moves into the next stage, moving to the next stage. So we'll definitely have to walk people through the vision and the process when we first introduce people to Predico, because we want all the information and the intelligence residing in one spot. So if you have questions along the way, or if information from this stage is relevant to information at this stage, it's easily accessible.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Could you talk a little bit, Albert? Tell me what sort of features the software has available now, or if you have plans to develop things in the future for this tool. What does that look like?
Where we are right now, we're alpha testing our subsurface risk assessment and complexity model. So we're using that internally. We hope to have it with external users here sometime in the next, call it 1 to 2 months, working up the final bugs, and then we send it out to the world for people to help us break it. In the next phase of development, we are looking at call it the environmental site assessment phase 1 part of the process. And once again, it helps give a coarse filter on being able to assess, do I have a good site or a bad site on surface, and how much more additional potential remediation or contamination addressing do I need to do in further down the process. So we have a long technology development roadmap. I think it probably spans about 10 years.
Yeah.
But we're looking at building tools for each step of this process. And you know, we're alpha testing the first part of it, and we're just starting the development on the second phase of that development.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that makes sense though. At essence, you're a technology company, you're an oil and gas services company. And if you're going to be investing in software, developing new tools, you need to understand where it's going and how it's going to meet the needs of industry. We're just about at the end of our time, Albert, but can you tell me, is there anything you're particularly excited about for this year, for next year, for Closure? I'm
a bit of a technology nerd, so I'm actually quite excited about, we just got approved for a joint project with the University of Alberta.
Oh, right.
Exploring some very interesting technology on being able to, call it, assess sites remotely. I'm very excited for that because I think that would, when you start talking about what that means, it means being able to do more work at your desk and reducing the amount of manual time that it takes to go start assessing sites.
Yeah, it's where we're going in a lot of industries, so that's really neat to hear. Well, listen, thanks for taking the time to come in to tell us a little bit about Closure and what you've got going on. I'm sure we'll hear more soon, but I wish you the best of luck.
Thanks very
this year
much.
and next.
Thanks for
Take
McLeod
care.
for inviting us.
Absolutely. Thank you.